as a boy, learning what it meant to be a man was really difficult because the three men in my life, they all kind of struck out at the plate, right? My bio dad, who just couldn't control the demon of alcoholism, and that wreaked havoc in our family to where it broke up when I was 5. My mom remarries when I'm 8 to a man who's a strict disciplinarian, former military guy, Hank. I called him Hank the Tank. I had nicknames for everybody. That was my way of coping, I guess. So Hank struck out. Then we get to foster care, and this guy was just crazy. One of the earliest memories I have, I was 5 years old. I remember my mom, I could tell there was tension, but I was busy playing Batman and Superman and running around the neighborhood and riding my bicycle and things like that. So I wasn't, as a 5-year-old, totally connected to the family dynamic. And I was a happy kid. I just enjoyed life. And in that context, though, man, it all kind of came crumbling down when, for some reason, my mom was not home. My dad was drunk, sitting in a chair, pounding a hammer on the ground, saying, "When your mother gets home, I'm going to kill her." Well, you know what that means. And he had put holes in the wall with that hammer that night, and he wouldn't let us leave. So it was a little terrifying. The next thing I knew, a policeman had walked in the door. My siblings had put me in the master bedroom alone, which was a little freaky, but I could see the splash of the squad car lights on the ceiling and on the walls. And a police officer walked in. I remember him putting his hand on my chest. I was faking being asleep because I thought that's what a good boy would do. Let me be a good boy. And I just remember him asking, "Are you okay?" And I remember opening my eyes. Of course, yeah, fine, thank you. And to a degree, it was all a facade, but I didn't know. I was trying to play the good boy part. And so he walked out of the room and I followed him. I jumped out of bed in my PJs and kind of followed right behind him. He opened the front door, and that's when I saw them putting my dad in a squad car in that traditional way that they put their hand on the head and put him in, and they sped off. And the next day we were on the move. My mom took the 5 kids, and we were all of a sudden in a new place, and it would be a couple of years before I saw my dad again. It was really sporadic how he came back into my life here and there. In my 7th birthday, I remember he had come by the house to pick out some groceries. He came by, and my poor mom's a single-parent mom. She's working maybe 2 or 3 jobs. And I remember one day I was home, and my dad came through the front door, and he said, "Hey, I just need to pick up a few things." And he went to the refrigerator and was grabbing food items. Now think of that. Here my mom, single-parent mom with 5 kids she's trying to feed, and her separated husband's coming in, taking food literally out of the mouths of her children. Because there were days we had nothing to eat. I remember one time not having milk. We had some Cheerios, and we all decided we were going to eat the Cheerios with Kool-Aid. But that's what it was. That was our choice. Put water in it or put Kool-Aid in it. And that was the environment we were in. And I remember my dad being there that day, and as he left, he said, "I'm going to bring you a baseball mitt for your birthday coming up." And I was like, wow, really? And it's just that childish thing where, wow, hope, promise. Okay, great, Dad. And it blossomed this kind of affection for him, right? So a couple weeks later is my birthday, and I remember Ricky, my best friend, we ran to the curb like every 15 minutes because I kept bragging to Ricky, "Hey, my dad's bringing me a real leather glove, not the fake plastic ones." And we'd run to the curb. I'd look down the street both ways. He never showed up. And I just remember Ricky at the end of the day. It went on all day. And I remember about 6 o'clock at night, he kind of hit me in the shoulder and said, "Hey, man, that's okay. Dads don't always keep their promises." Whew. That was the reality. Dads don't always keep their promises. My mom remarries when I'm 8 to a man who's a strict disciplinarian, former military guy, Hank. I called him Hank the Tank. I had nicknames for everybody. That was my way of coping, I guess. My mom then, she was sick. We didn't know what was happening. I'm in 4th grade, and I remember my brother one day, my older brother, Mike, who was a big guy. He was 10 years older. He was in the Navy at this point. He's 19. He's 6'5". He's, working out. He's a big guy. He ended up playing college football. And I remember Mike called me into a bedroom and I was the last to be called in because each sibling was called in by descending age order. So my next oldest brother, Dave, called into the room and he came out crying, and then my sister Kim went in and she came out crying, and Dee went in and she came out crying, and my brother Mike said, Jimmy, I need to tell you something, come in the room. I'm thinking, I'm not going in that room. I mean, it's devastating, everybody's crying. But I went in and he sat me on his knee and he just said, there's no easy way to tell you this, but mom's dead. And that was, it was just such an impact because I didn't have any clue. I knew she wasn't feeling well, but I thought it may have been a cold or the flu. And to hear that she was dead, because my mom was everything. And especially in that vacuum where you have a lack of father. Moms, God bless them, moms step up and they do it. And I was grateful for a good mom. But man, then Hank, the day of the funeral, just a couple of days later, we get home from the funeral, he comes up and says, I can't take the pressure, I'm leaving. And we're like, okay, what do we do? And my brother said, hey, we're going to foster care. And so Hank struck out. Then we get to foster care, and this guy was just crazy, this dad. Ironically, his name was Mr. Real, but it was very unreal. And he accused me of trying to murder him as a 9-year-old boy. And I think in that context, it just gave me a hunger for truth. What is true? Because there's no adult here who's telling the truth. And I felt like as a child, I could know truth better than these adults. That's a very unsettling feeling when you're a 9-year-old and you see it clearer than the adults in your life. That was tough. So my dad came back into my life, living at the Reels. Was at the end about a year at this foster family, and he had finally caught up to the news that mom had died, that the kids were at this foster home, and there were 3 of us. 2 of my siblings had kind of grown up and moved on. So my dad showed up about a year into that experience, and just to make a visit, and I can remember kind of clinging to his leg saying, you gonna get me out of this weird place? Now, you put it in context, what are you talking about? Your alcoholic father, right? But it's an amazing thing, the love that God places in the heart of a child for his imperfect parent. And I think that's because we all are imperfect, and children love their parents regardless of many of their shortcomings. And I felt that. I loved my dad even though he struggled terribly. And, I think I just wanted to go with him. Please get me out of here. And at the end of the day, he said, do you want to come and live with me? And I was, yes. And then I can remember even that night thinking, which dad will I get? Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde? But now, hey, it's worth it. I'll live with either one because this has been so crazy. I'm willing to gamble. So my sister and I moved back. She was 17, I'm 11. And we moved back in with my dad. And then a year later, it was still tough. He had some bad nights where he had gotten drunk, but never violent. In fact, my father never spanked me. He and my brother had some fist fights, but that never cascaded down to me. There was something in our relationship where he would put his arm around me and say, you're my special little boy. I was the last born. So I think it was just circumstantial that he had a certain affection for me that he didn't show the other siblings. And that, who knows, that may have made some of the biggest difference in my relationship with him. But, we lived there a year, and then at the end of the year, the siblings got together with me and said, we don't think you should stay living with Dad. It's too difficult. So, okay, what are my options? Well, you can move in with Dave, my brother. And I think in some ways it was a forced situation. If I think back on it, it was probably the healthiest thing to do, healthier, but they didn't think he would hear it from them, so they also said, you're the one that needs to tell him. So we had this big family conference. We're all in the living room of my brother's house, and my dad's sitting in the one corner of the room, and I just looked at him and said, I don't think I should live with you anymore. And he looked at me and said, why? And I didn't know what to say. And so it felt like a long time had passed, seconds, but I just looked at him and I said, because of the way you treated Mom, and you're not a good father. Imagine hearing that from your 11-year-old. And to his credit, he stood up, walked across the room, he hugged me, and he said, you're right. I haven't been a good father, and I wasn't a good husband. And he left, and 4 months later, he died. You know, it's hard. When I was a teenager, you're thinking, okay, there's two paths in front of you. You can choose a path of darkness. You could become what you don't like, what you despise, or you can choose a better path. And I think in that context, that's where God's grace means everything. And, you know, just the right people came across my path, whether it was a teacher, football coach, Paul Morrow, who played a great role in developing my character. And I think probably the hardest thing is not holding on to bitterness and resentment and anger, which is really that other direction. And you got to let that go. And I can't explain the capacity to do that. I just know for me, I always had been a very optimistic kid. And, you know, I think the Lord used that to say, these men in your life had problems, but it doesn't reflect on you. It doesn't have to be who you are. And that's the advice I would give to those dads like me who didn't have a role model of any kind. You've got to find a way to set that aside. It's okay. With me, it's going to be different. I'm not going to take what I experienced and put that on my children. I was talking the other day with a senator, Senator Tim Scott, and I had been thinking about everything that's been going on in the country. And, you know, I get heavy-hearted about it because you're thinking, what's the solution? And it was, you know, in this conversation I felt like I was having with the Lord, where he said, it's me. And it's true. It's true if you're an orphan. It's true if you're a battered child. It's true if you're, whatever circumstance you're in, whatever injustice you're encountering. The way out is through Christ. I can't imagine what my life would be like without a commitment to Jesus. And, you know, that came about as a teenager. I had great role models, particularly my football coach, Paul Morrow, who, you know, he had such a knack. He was a tough dude. He played linebacker. That's probably why. But, you know, I can remember him in practice grabbing my face mask. I was a quarterback on the team, and he grabbed my face mask and jerked my head around saying, if you want to lead my team, you need to finish these wind sprints first. You know, and that was kind of the first calling out I'd ever had, because I was dogging it, man, I can do this. But he called me out. And I think boys need to be called out by men. Men they can respect. And that's one of the problems, at least in my experience. I didn't respect any of the men that I had encountered. My dad, my stepdad, my foster dad, they were not men worthy of my respect. And I knew that. Coach Morrow, he was the first man in my life that I went, whoa, I got to respect this guy. And he shaped me. I mean, he did the job. And, you know, in all of that, he also said, the only way you're going to survive this world is through a commitment to Jesus. And he sponsored me to go to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp when I was, I think, 15. And Point Loma University, and we went there. And this guy, a professional football player, I can't even remember who it was, but he got down there and this Wednesday night of the 1 week camp, and he just said, have men let you down? There was like 40 of us guys, all football players in there going, this is a drag. Why do we got to sit and listen to this dude? Let's go get a Coca-Cola, you know, because we're tired. We've been playing football all day. And he just said, have men let you down? Has your father let you down? Has your stepfather let you down? I was going, whoa, this guy's speaking to me. And then he, you know, gave an invitation, give your life to the Lord, because that's a man who will never let you down. And I came forward to give my life to Christ. I wobbled. It took me like 7 years to figure out what does that mean to make a commitment to Christ, because I was living in such, you know, chaos. But the Lord was faithful even when I wasn't. And he just kept pulling me along. One of the most difficult questions I get, especially when I speak and give my testimony, inevitably there'll be a few guys in that line and someone's going to say, How'd you do that? I can't do that. I'm angry at my dad. I'm bitter toward my father. It's the hardest question that I ever get because I don't know the answer other than commitment to Christ. And it sounds like such a cliche, but commitment to Christ is what enables you to absorb and become more of the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, goodness. Your dad, if he was missing in action, if he was that alcoholic, that drug abuser, you've got to find a way to say, Lord, forgive me for that bitterness that I have toward him. And if you can get there, that's the place. So you don't have to own their inadequacies, their shortcomings. Give it to them. Come to that realization that they had difficulty, they had problems. And if you can get to that point where you can actually pray for your father who may have wounded you deeply, that's the beginning of restoration. And who knows? I mean, I've heard some incredibly difficult stories of sons reconnecting with their dads. And sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But don't hang your hat on that. Hang your hat on Christ. Know that he loves you. And as an orphan kid, I love that in the scripture, that he's a father to the fatherless. What greater daddy could you have than the creator of the universe? And I'm sorry, even as a father, I can't measure up to that. So I want my boys to have even a better relationship with God than they do with me. That's more important to me. You know, we do a series with a Jewish scholar, Ray Vanderlaan, called That the World May Know. And I remember being with him in Israel with a group from Focus on the Family. And as we were, trudging through the heat of the desert and we were hiking 10, 12 miles a day in 100-degree plus weather. But one teaching that he did, he talked about, fundamentally it all boils down to sin entering the world and chaos entering the world. And that's what that's been my life. It's just been this life of chaos as a kid. It's far better now, but that's because of Christ. And here's the point. He said Jesus came into the chaos of this world to bring his shalom, God's peace, his redemption into this world. And when we get that right, when we get that understanding, then regardless of the chaos in your life, however it comes to you, in your marriage, in your experience with your father, whatever it's been, when you get that redemption message correct, you've got it. And then those arrows, those darts, those things that come your direction, truly, and I say this from my own experience, it'll bounce off of you because there's so much better inside of you than the evil coming at you. And that's the whole point. One of the things too is we don't stop encountering God. He's our Father till the last breath and then beyond, right? He's still going to be our Father when we're with him in heaven. And I can remember one time here at Focus, I'm now in my 40s at that point. I'm in my 50s now, but I'm running Focus. We're going through the 07 economic collapse. We're having to lay off literally hundreds of people. And I recall that Dr. Dobson used to talk about when he was in a jam in the early days of Focus, he'd call his dad, and his dad was always able to give him a word of wisdom. Wow, what a great thing. Unfortunately, not all of us have that relationship with an earthly father, right? So I can remember being in my basement, in my big chair, praying at 2, 3 in the morning. And I'm just feeling like, wow, I don't have a dad to call. Lord, how come I don't have a dad to call to ask him for his wisdom? And complaining. And what the Lord responded with in my heart, I'll never forget this. It had emotional tone to it. And it was this thought in my heart. And this is what he said. Haven't I been a good father? Whew. Absolutely. I got down on my face on the floor and said, I'm so sorry. You've been the most awesome dad anyone can have. What do? That's the relationship he wants with you.